What's up? I'm Jack. Welcome back to the LFC Transfer Room. Premier League football is back this weekend when Liverpool travel to Leeds to return from international football. Joining us today is Leeds football writer Phil Hay for The Athletic to talk more about how Leeds could line up ahead of Sunday's fixture. Make sure to subscribe. Let's get right into the video. In their second season back in the Premier League under Marcelo Bielsa, Leeds are a very interesting side, very fun side to watch, and they don't really like to change their side for anybody. Their season to start off has been a bit slow, but nothing that can't be fixed.
We've been a little bit spoiled under Bielsa. He has had the habit of going through pre-season, flicking the switch, and Leeds being fairly electric in the opening weeks of the season. That was certainly true of both years in the Championship and again in the Premier League last season. It's been a little bit different this time, and I do feel it's been a little bit flat in comparison. The usual spark hasn't quite been there, and I don't think there are kind of massive fundamental issues with the way they've played so far or with the performances. It just hasn't been as fluid as you used to, and as I say, you do become accustomed very quickly to Bielsa's football always being on point. I think to a degree, it's got to be expected that he's going to go through little periods where form does desert them slightly. It's almost impossible to, like last season, for example, avoiding 3 defeats on the bounce at any stage and really avoiding any significant downturn in form was very impressive for a newly promoted side. But in terms of the way they're playing and the way they're pressing and everything else, there isn't a huge, demarcation from this season to last season. It is basically Bielsa's football as we've come to know it. It just hasn't quite clicked in these 3 games so far.
Now, news coming out as this is being recorded that reports are that Brazil are trying to keep Brazilian players from playing in the Premier League, had their clubs denied them from traveling. So Alisson, Ederson, Fabinho, I think Firmino, Rafinha, Fred, Richarlison, all of whom play for Premier League clubs that were called up for the national team but held back by their clubs, could be removed from play. Rafinha, should he be able to play, should the ruling be reversed to allow things to happen, he could be a very dangerous player for Leeds.
It would be a big loss. We're still in that kind of limbo situation at the moment where there's a lot going on in the background, and you have this strange situation where the Premier League, as a kind of blanket organisation, have opposed these call-ups and are clearly at odds with the Brazilian FA over it. And you have FIFA in the middle, who I don't think has shown enough leadership with this at all, and seem to be, flip-flopping between concerns about the pandemic, but equally trying hard to make sure that none of their vested interests are damaged either. At the moment, Rafinha is still training with Leeds. They haven't ruled him out of the plans for the weekend completely, but they know fine well that it may be the case that this ban is imposed and they lose him. He would be a definite starter against Liverpool if he's available. Rafinha on the right, Jack Harrison on the left. And he is, without a doubt, the most dangerous player at Leeds, the player who can create something out of nothing. I think the player who, with the possible exception of Calvin Phillips, when it comes to valuation, is probably the most valuable asset in the squad at Leeds. And I think further down the line, potentially the sort of player who could attract very, very big bids. Bielsa will want to start him. He does have Dan James, obviously, after James moved from Manchester United. But the thing about Bielsa is that he likes the players to train, the new signings to train for a considerable period of time before he throws them in. He likes to properly school them in his tactics, and he's not somebody who's particularly prone to blooding new players straight away. It may well be needs must on Sunday, and it might be that there's an opening for Dan James, which wouldn't otherwise have been there. So suffice to say, Rafinha will start if he's available to start, but it's quite clearly a mess, and as I'm speaking to you now, the club still don't know exactly where they stand on this.
Leeds under Bielsa are notably stubborn and they want to play football, their style of football. They're 4-1-4-1, incredibly aggressive, incredibly attacking. That's not going to change, even for Liverpool.
I don't think you'll see him change it at any point. There was the tactical shift at Burnley because Burnley play with 2 up front, and against that system, Bielsa likes to go with 3 centre-backs, so he shifts to his old and famous 3-3-1-3 system. But more often than not, it is 4-1-4-1 with Phillips in the defensive midfield role and Bamford up front. And again, that's what I'm sure he'll do against Liverpool. I don't see Liverpool's system deviating in a way which makes him want to change at all. The European Super League game was interesting because it really did put Liverpool in the eye of the storm for that one. You could tell the body language and the comments of Klopp and particularly Milner afterwards that it had been a difficult 24 hours for them. And it seemed to me that they'd been dangled a little bit by the board at Anfield. In the absence of any comment from the board, it was kind of left to Klopp and Milner and others to try and explain what was going on. And you had Leeds with the T-shirts that they wore before the game. You had the protests outside the ground, and I know that Liverpool supporters travelled over to Leeds to take part in that protest, even though they weren't allowed to get into the ground. So there was a bit of a political backdrop to it, which I think did make it difficult for Klopp and did make it difficult for Liverpool. But I felt that Leeds played extremely well in both games against Liverpool last season. If truth be told, with the exception of Manchester United and the Chelsea game away, I felt that they were relatively strong against the top six, and in some cases really impressively so.
A big addition for Leeds at the end of the transfer window was the signing of Dan James from Manchester United. Now, Sunday may come too soon for him because of the high fitness standards and demands of Marcelo Bielsa, but he's going to play an impact for sure.
Well, he's been away with Wales, so the first question will be what condition he is in when he comes back. He should be match fit, although there can often be a difference between the average perception of match fitness and Bielsa's perception of match fitness. He is absolutely rigid when it comes to not throwing players into the fray before he thinks they're ready, and that comes down to things like the mother-ball sessions through the week, which he uses to analyse the amount of distance they're covering and the intensity of the sprints. You have to score highly on in those sessions and through training right from the start of the week. But I'd be very surprised if James isn't at least on the bench. I think he's very unlikely to start because you've got Harrison on the left and Rafinha on the right, both of whom are relative fixtures in the team and very hard to shift. But this is the sort of game where you would like to think that James at 25 million could potentially make a difference. If they need somebody off the bench, he does give them that little bit of magic and that little bit of invention, which, to be quite honest, is a little bit difficult to find among the substitutes. It can be a very young bench. It's not heavily loaded with what you'd look at as necessarily proven Premier League options for Bielsa. He's different in that respect. He's obviously had a bit of time at Manchester United. He's played enough in the Premier League. He's a player who Bielsa absolutely loves. I mean, they obviously missed out on him in 2019 in really weird deadline day drama, but they've always had their eye on him, and even in this window, right from the very start, the sort of briefings from Leeds were that they might do a winger towards the end of it, and it would very much depend who came up. It would very much depend what the valuation was, but they always spoke about James because they knew that even though it hadn't happened first time around, Bielsa had never given up on him or completely lost interest in him.
Liverpool are undoubtedly the favourite team, but Leeds certainly have it in them to try and pull out a result.
I think it's fairly likely that Liverpool will try to dominate a reasonable share of possession. It's never seemed to me that Klopp obsesses about possession in the way that Bielsa does or Guardiola. I think he is more willing to play without it, and he has systems and traps and tactics that can cope without so much of it. But I imagine he'll be wary of Leeds playing too much on the front foot. I think the key for Leeds will be precision. I was looking back at the Burnley game, and there were three counter-attacks, kind of back-to-back in the space of 5 minutes at Turf Moor, where, and that's a real strength of Bielsa's Leeds. They're not renowned as a counter-attacking side because they do dominate possession so much, but actually when they play in that style, or when they do break from deep, they can be really lethal. And it was just the final touch, the final ball that was lacking there, that little bit of precision that I think would have made the difference and could potentially have made it a very different game at Burnley. That's where the game will be won and lost for them. They're obviously going to need big performances from people like Rafinha. They're going to need a very big performance from Phillips, managing whoever Klopp plays as his forward line, but I think we can guess who it'll be. Phillips is going to have to monitor them closely. He's going to have to be on top of them. But when it comes to scoring goals, they are going to have to make sure that the good positions they get into, they make something of, because I don't think they will get an endless supply of chances against Liverpool.
On the other side of things, Liverpool, as a favourite, are going to be at a very tough test away at Elland Road. So what do they need to do to try and come away with 3 points?
He will try to spring the traps that he likes to spring, get the press right, draw Leeds into the areas that they want to draw them into. and Liverpool have enough pace going forward to exploit the gaps that Leeds leave behind them. The one advantage that Leeds have, despite how aggressive they are and despite how heavily they commit players up the pitch, is that they are fit enough and mobile enough to cover even in those circumstances. They've looked a touch wobbly defensively, I think. I mean, to say the least, at Old Trafford on the first day of the season. But even against Everton, there was they absolutely deserved a point from that. And I thought that, as a whole, over the 90 minutes, they played well, but there was a definite period in the second half at 2-1 down where it felt as if the game might just get away from them. A couple of big chances for Calvert-Lewin, which he didn't take. One particularly good save from Milan Melier kept Leeds in the game at that point. And I think at the moment, particularly minus a fully fit Diego Llorente, who to my mind is the best centre-back at Leeds at the moment, they just look a touch frail at the back. They haven't looked as solid as they did when he was in the team at the back end of last season. But I think for Klopp, the counter-attacking might work well for him, and I think it will be the transitional play that will be key.
All right, let's switch it now to a bit of a tactical look at this match. So currently what we've got here is Liverpool's 4-3-3 and Leeds United's 4-1-4-1. So in the defensive midfield role is Calvin Phillips, the lone forward, Patrick Bamford. The numbers are at times not accurate, but you get the picture schematically of how they're going to try and line things up. A big issue for Liverpool is the availability or unavailability of their Brazilian players. In net, obviously, you have Alisson as your netminder, tremendous goalkeeper, one of, if not the best goalkeeper in the Premier League. Is he available? Maybe he's not. Fabinho, in my estimation, best defensive mid in the world. Is he available? We don't know. Rafinha, really talented right winger for Leeds. Is he available? We don't know. So those are three huge keys. And obviously, if you wanted to bring on Roberto Firmino as well in place of Jota, is he available injury-wise or availability-wise? We don't know. This is probably the system that Liverpool are going to try and set up things up with. If there's no Rafinha, maybe Dan James makes an immediate impact and has to come on a bit earlier. Maybe Marcelo Bielsa would actually like for it to happen. I think Henderson, maybe Keita, maybe it's Thiago. I'm not really sure who plays the biggest role in this midfield trio with Naby Keita. Obviously the political issues in Guinea, there's a lot of question marks there. But if he's fit, if he's available, he's a contender to try and make an appearance in that match. And obviously Liverpool have on Wednesday the match against Milan in the Champions League, so they have to keep that in mind as well. Front three is Salah, Jota, and Mane is probable. Diego Llorente, if he can play for Leeds, is going to be a big return to the center-back areas for them. They're much better defensive side with him, as Phil Hay mentioned. Big key for Leeds is that they're going to go at Liverpool. They're going to attack him. Jack Harrison, is it Rafinha, is it Dan James? It's going to be a threat regardless. Robertson didn't have the greatest return when he played against Chelsea, but he's got a lot more fitness, a lot more training under his legs, especially after traveling with Scotland. So he's going to potentially be back too close to his best. Van Dijk also having a big role for the Netherlands in their international matches. Joel Matip, you'd imagine he hasn't lost his spot after some great performances, especially against Chelsea. So there's a lot of different contenders out there. Henderson back to full fitness. Liverpool hopefully could begin to bring things back into full swing. But the issue is it Kaheem Kelleher in net? Do you have to play maybe James Milner in that defensive midfield spot? Do you play Henderson in that defensive midfield spot? Play Thiago in the midfield with Keita? Does Harvey Elliott feature? Depth is still an issue for Liverpool, but in a few spots, they have a few rotationary pieces that are available. Injury issues for Minamino and Roberto Firmino means that Divock Origi is the probable option off the bench for them in the match. So is that a problem? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's going to be a good match regardless, so I'm looking forward to it. Let us know your thoughts on the Leeds match in the comments down below. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. We'll have pre-match content predictions, combined 11s, which may include more Leeds players than you might expect. We've had some interesting debates about that in our WhatsApp group chat. And we'll obviously have a watch-along on Sunday. Could be a 4-person watch-along with Matty, who is staunchly opposed to it. He might make his debut this weekend. That's it for our review today. Thank you very much to Phil Hay for coming out of the channel. Appreciate his tremendous insight, as always. I've been Jack for LFC Transfer. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take care.